Elia's ward stepped off the shuttle onto the polished surface of the Velarix palace, his heart hammering as though it wanted to escape his chest. The light here was different, cool, sharp, and almost metallic, reflecting off the massive spires that reached into the sky. He had never seen anything like it on Earth. Even the air smelled strange, tinged with an unfamiliar sweetness, as if the planet itself exhaled power. Around him, Velarix attendants moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, their movements precise and elegant, each step a silent declaration of authority. Elia's was a mere human, walking among giants. That thought pressed against him constantly, a reminder that he was only here because diplomacy required a token presence from his species. Humanity had never been considered a serious player in the galaxy. They were clever, yes, and stubborn, but weak in body, weak in politics, and almost always underestimated. Elias had heard it from countless Velarix diplomats. Humans were fragile, emotional, and too unpredictable. And yet here he was, representing his people in one of the most important gatherings of his life. The palace doors slid open without a sound, revealing a grand hall unlike anything Elias had imagined. Towers of crystal caught the light, scattering it across walls of polished metal. Alien tapestries depicted scenes of battles and diplomacy that spanned centuries, all woven with colors he had never seen before. And at the far end of the hall, on a platform that seemed to float above the rest, stood her, Princess Salith of Velarix. She was breathtaking. Taller than any human, with skin that shimmered like liquid silver and eyes that glowed faintly with an inner light. Her presence was commanding yet serene, like a force of nature that could not be questioned. The crown she wore was simple by Velarix standards, yet it radiated power. And when her gaze fell on him, Elias felt as though the entire hall had narrowed to a single point, focused only on him. For a moment he froze, unsure if he should bow, kneel, or simply stand. In his nervousness, he did what humans often did when faced with the overwhelming. He smiled awkwardly. Salith's eyes flickered with something he could not name, amusement, curiosity, perhaps recognition of his audacity. "Human," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that pressed on Elia's chest. "You walk among my people as if you belong." "Why?" "Humans speak of honor and courage," she said, stepping down from the platform. "Yet I see fear in your eyes. Why do you stand here when you are afraid?" "And because I believe, maybe foolishly, that humans have something to offer, something you cannot see yet." This was a world where honesty, raw, unguarded honesty, might be the only weapon he had. "You speak boldly," she said, moving closer. The hall seemed impossibly large, yet every step she took brought her closer until Elias could see the intricate patterns of her armor, the faint hum of energy that seemed to surround her. "Perhaps it is foolish, perhaps it is dangerous. But it is human." The gathering began soon after, and Elias found himself surrounded by Velarix nobles and diplomats, all observing him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. They spoke in a language that sounded musical but harsh, their words carrying layers of meaning he struggled to understand. Translators worked frantically, but still, he felt the weight of judgment. Humans were always watched, always tested, always underestimated. And yet he realized something remarkable. None of them had expected him to endure. None had expected a human to hold their gaze, to speak without fear. When the speeches began, Elias listened. He noticed the subtle gestures, the quiet alliances, the hidden messages in the tones of voice. Salith, seated above the others, watched him with eyes that seemed to pierce through the crowd and straight into his mind. He felt exposed and oddly safe at the same time, as if she were both a threat and a shield. Hours passed. Discussions of trade, territory, and alliances filled the hall, yet Elias found his attention drifting. He watched the subtle flicker of emotion across Salith's face, the brief tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible raising of her eyebrow. Something in her expression told him that she, too, felt the weight of expectation. For all her power, all her elegance, she was trapped in a system that dictated every choice she made. When the formalities ended, she approached him alone. The hall emptied around them, leaving only the distant hum of the palace in the background. Elias could feel his heart racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You walk among us and speak as if we are equals," Salith said quietly, her voice now softer, almost curious. "Why do you do this?" "Because humans, we are underestimated, we make mistakes. We are flawed, but we feel, we care, and sometimes that is stronger than power. Perhaps it can be a kind of courage." Velarix had lost this. They had suppressed emotion in the name of survival, in the name of dominance. And yet here was a human who dared to feel, to risk, to speak. "Come," Salith said finally. "Walk with me, not behind me, not as a guest, but beside me." He nodded, trying not to stumble over his own awe. As they moved through the palace gardens, Elias noticed the contrast between the rigid halls and the soft, alien flora that grew here. The plants shimmered with faint luminescence, their forms twisting in ways that seemed alive, almost sentient. Salith moved among them with ease, her fingers brushing against petals, her eyes softening in a way humans rarely saw on Velaric's faces. "Why do you show me this?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you see it differently," she said. "Humans notice what we forget. You see life, not just power. You feel it, not just control." "That is rare." They walked in silence for a while, listening to the soft hum of the gardens, the distant calls of alien birds, the wind stirring through strange, metallic leaves. Elias realized something profound. This was not just a palace. It was a world shaped by rules, by power, by centuries of control. And yet here with her, he could glimpse something beyond all that, a possibility, a connection, a spark of humanity in the heart of an empire that had long forgotten it. Eventually, they stopped near a small pool. The water reflected the light of the twin moons, creating ripples that danced across Salith's face. Elias swallowed hard, the words forming before he could stop them. I wish I could wed you," he whispered, the sound almost lost in the night air. "But I know it is impossible." I don't understand." Wars raged, alliances shifted, and humans were still considered weak and fleeting. But here in the palace gardens beside a princess of one of the most powerful empires in existence, Elias realized that perhaps humans were capable of more than anyone, including himself, had ever imagined. And perhaps, just perhaps, a whispered wish could change everything. Elias could hardly sleep that night. The words Salith had spoken earlier echoed in his mind. "Then you shall." He had walked among the stars, seen wonders no human had ever imagined, yet nothing had prepared him for the weight of her promise. He had whispered a wish, an impossible wish, and she had answered as if it were the simplest truth in the universe. The Velaric's palace was quiet, but the silence felt alive. Elias lay on the hard, polished bed in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what "then you shall" could mean. Could a human really marry a princess of the Velaric's empire? Could he even survive the political consequences if anyone discovered it? He shivered at the thought. Yet underneath the fear there was excitement. Humans had always been underestimated. They had survived wars, starvation, and the cruelty of the galaxy, not because they were the strongest, but because they never gave up. Elias had survived the journey to Velarix, the formalities, the piercing gazes of the nobles. And now, he had survived Salith's smile, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. By the next morning, the palace was alive with activity. Servants moved quickly, diplomats argued softly behind closed doors, and soldiers marched in precise lines, their armor shining like mirrors. Elias was summoned to meet with Salith again. This time, it was not a public gathering, but a private walk through the upper gardens of the palace. She awaited him, standing at the edge of a terrace that overlooked the glowing city below. The twin moons reflected in her silver hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. "You came," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying a question. "I did," Elias replied, bowing slightly, though he felt it unnecessary. I want to understand." "Why humans are so different," he said. "Why we feel so deeply even when it hurts, and why you seem to notice it. That is extraordinary. That is what makes you strong. Beautiful and cruel at the same time. People fight over small things, over pride, over fear. But we also make music, art, stories. We laugh even when everything seems hopeless. We love even when we know it can hurt us. That is what I wanted to show you, I think." Diplomats spoke of trade, of power, of conquest, but Elias spoke of emotion, of the soul, and somehow it resonated with her. "You speak as if humans are wise beyond their place," she said softly. "Yet most of your people are as fragile as you are. We fight in ways others do not expect, and we survive even when survival seems impossible. And yet here you are, a human who dares to speak to me as an equal. That is remarkable." They were too weak, too emotional, too short-lived. Yet here she was, walking with one, speaking to one, perhaps even listening. Over the next days, Elias and Salith met in secret. They explored hidden corridors of the palace, walked among gardens that glowed under alien moons, and spoke of the galaxy's history and even dreams. Elias taught her about Earth, about human music, about laughter and sorrow, about the small things that made life meaningful. In return, Salith showed him parts of Velaric's society that no human was meant to see. The private libraries where knowledge of the Empire was kept, the chambers where diplomats whispered secrets that could start wars, and the inner halls where Velarics themselves allowed their rare emotions to surface. Their bond grew quietly but powerfully. Ilias felt as though he had found a world where his humanity mattered, where the very things that made him weak in the eyes of others were valued. And Salith, she began to see him not as a fragile human, but as someone who could stand beside her, who could challenge her perceptions and awaken feelings she had long thought dead. But the galaxy was not blind. Rumors began to spread. Whispers reached the ears of Velaric's advisors and the distant humans who had sent Ilias. The idea of a human being close to the princess was scandalous, even dangerous. Some human diplomats worried for Ilias, fearing he might be used as a pawn, or worse, eliminated quietly to prevent scandal. Velaric's advisors fretted that a human could corrupt the princess, that the delicate balance of power would crumble if such a bond were allowed. One evening, as the twin moons reflected in the palace's silver walls, Ilias sat with Salith near a quiet fountain. The water shimmered with a light of its own, creating ripples that danced across her face. He looked at her, and a thought that had been growing in his mind forced itself into words. "I fear," he admitted, "that if anyone discovers our meetings, it could be the end of me, and perhaps the end of us. The soul does not wait for permission. And humans are extraordinary. You survive against odds that would crush others. You feel deeply when others suppress themselves. You see truth when others hide behind lies. That is why I notice you." He had never imagined a princess could see him like this, not as a weak human, but as someone capable of understanding, of meaning, of love. The galaxy might consider him insignificant, but she did not. And that was more powerful than anything else in the universe. Days turned into weeks. Their secret walks continued, and with each passing moment the bond between them strengthened. They spoke of strategy, of politics, of the strange and beautiful things that made life worth living. Ilias shared stories of human resilience, of battles fought and won against impossible odds, of art and literature that survived despite wars and hatred. Salith, in turn, shared memories of Velaric's history, of moments when emotion had been sacrificed for survival, of traditions so old that they had become invisible even to her. Through it all, Ilias realized something. Humans had always been underestimated, not because they were weak, but because their strength was not obvious. It was not in weapons, in numbers, or in brute force. It was in the ability to endure, to care, to adapt, and to rise again when the world seemed determined to crush them. And in Salith's presence, he felt that strength more clearly than ever. Yet the danger remained. One evening, an urgent message arrived from the Galactic Council. Humans were being questioned, their intentions scrutinized, and whispers of scandal had begun to circulate. The council feared that Ilias' proximity to the princess could upset the delicate balance of power, that the Velaric's empire might see humans as threats, or worse, that a scandal could ignite war. Ilias read the message and felt a chill run down his spine. The galaxy was watching, waiting for him to fail, expecting him to crumble. But something inside him stirred, a quiet, unyielding resolve. Humans might be underestimated, but they were not helpless. If the galaxy wanted to see weakness, they would see something else entirely. He looked at Salith, who stood beside him, her hand still warm in his. I don't know what will happen," he said, "but I know one thing: I will not run, I will not hide. Not when it matters." But he knew this. In a galaxy that saw humans as weak and fleeting, he had found a connection, a bond, a purpose. And he would fight to protect it, no matter the cost. As the moons rose higher, casting their silver light across the gardens, Ilias realized something profound. Humans were not supposed to matter in the courts of empires. They were supposed to survive quietly, unnoticed. And yet here he was, standing beside a princess, daring to defy expectation, daring to feel, daring to hope. The galaxy outside remained vast and indifferent. Wars would rage, alliances would shift, and humans would continue to be underestimated. But here, in the quiet glow of alien moons and shimmering fountains, Ilias understood something essential. Humans might be fragile, but their courage, their honesty, and their capacity to love were forces no empire could ignore. And as he walked beside Salith, he knew that whatever the galaxy demanded of them next, they would face it together. Humans and Velarics, heart and soul, defying the impossible. The news spread faster than Ilias could have imagined. At first, It was nothing more than whispers, strange glances from Velaric's nobles, and subtle questions during diplomatic meetings. "Have you noticed the human aide?" one would murmur to another. "He seems close to the princess." During one of their secret meetings in the upper gardens, she stopped walking and faced him, her expression calm but her eyes serious. "They are watching more closely," she said. "The council has begun to speak in hushed tones. They do not approve. But if they believe a human could influence me, if they think you might change the empire, they will try to remove the threat quietly." The very next day, he was summoned by one of the senior Velaric's advisors. The chamber was cold, metallic, and perfectly silent. The advisor's gaze was sharp, piercing, and filled with disapproval. "You are aware," the advisor began, "that proximity to the heir of the Velaric's empire is not trivial. Your presence, your influence, it is unusual. Dangerous. Do not mistake your personal feelings for permission." That evening he met Salith in the gardens again. The air was thick with the glow of the twin moons, and the alien flowers reflected light like jewels. She did not speak at first, simply watching him as he approached. "They are talking," she said softly. "The council, your people, everyone is watching. Do you realize what that means? If they act, there could be war, or worse. Your life could end here quietly without anyone knowing." "Not when it matters." Salith showed him parts of Velaric's life that no outsider should ever see. The libraries filled with forbidden knowledge, the halls where alliances were secretly forged, and the chambers where the true cost of emotionless power was recorded. The more Elias learned, the more he realized that humans' greatest weapon was not strength or technology, but something the Velarics had lost: the ability to feel, to adapt, to fight for what mattered even when defeat seemed inevitable. And Salith was beginning to see it too, but danger was closing in. One night while Elias returned to his quarters, he was intercepted by a group of Velaric's envoys. Their eyes were cold and their movements precise, like predators circling prey. "You are walking a dangerous path," the lead envoy said. "The council has noticed. The princess is your responsibility now. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes," he said, "and I accept it. Humans survive when we must. I will survive." He realized that the galaxy had underestimated him, not because he was weak, but because no one had truly measured the strength of a human's heart. He would not shrink. He would not hide. Word of their secret meetings finally reached human leaders. Some were alarmed. A few sent urgent messages warning Elias to step back, to protect himself and humanity's fragile position in the galaxy. Others were quietly curious, wondering if perhaps humanity had found a way to influence the most powerful empire without violence. Elias read the messages and felt both fear and determination. Humans were not meant to be rulers of the galaxy, but perhaps they were meant to change it, not with weapons, but with courage, honesty, and connection. Salith met him the next day, her expression calm but urgent. "The whispers are louder," she said. "Some within the council are plotting to separate us. They believe that a human could corrupt the empire. We have forgotten courage, kindness, and the strength that comes from feeling. That is why I notice you. That is why I choose you, not as a pawn, not as a curiosity, but as someone who changes the way I see the world." For the first time, he understood that humans' greatest power was not in domination, but in connection, in the ability to touch lives and hearts, even in a galaxy that despised them. Days passed, and the pressure grew. Council meetings were held in secret. Velaric's nobles whispered among themselves, debating whether a human could truly be worthy of the princess. The rumors reached distant planets where humans were often mocked for their weakness. Now some began to question. Perhaps the humans were stronger than anyone realized. One night, as they walked under the alien moons, Elias spoke softly. "I fear for you," he said. "For us. If they move against us, it could destroy everything." "Then we must be smarter," she said. "We cannot fight them with force. That is not our way. We must fight with truth, with courage, with the strength that humans have always carried quietly. That is our advantage. And we rise when it matters most." It was during one of these nights, as they stood by the reflective waters of a quiet fountain, that Elias realized something profound. The galaxy might consider humans insignificant. They might expect them to bow, to fail, to vanish quietly. But humans had a resilience that no one had truly measured, a courage born not of power, but of necessity. And in Salith, he had found someone who saw that strength, someone willing to risk everything to honor it. I never imagined this," he said softly. "To be seen, to matter, to be noticed by someone like you." And perhaps that is why the galaxy has begun to stir. The galaxy beyond the palace walls continued its quiet chaos, but inside, something remarkable was unfolding. A human and a princess, walking together, learning from one another, daring to challenge the expectations of thousands of worlds. Their bond was more than love, it was proof that courage, honesty, and connection could shift the course of history. Elias took Salith's hand in his. "Then we face it," he said, "whatever comes next, together." And for the first time, Elias realized that perhaps the galaxy was about to witness something extraordinary, not because of power, but because of humanity. The galaxy was beginning to notice. What had started as whispers among Velaric's nobles had grown into rumors that spread across star systems. Humans were being spoken of in ways that made even seasoned diplomats pause. The idea that a mere human could walk beside Princess Salith, could influence her thoughts, her emotions, her decisions, was almost unimaginable. Elias felt the weight of it every time he moved through the palace. Eyes followed him, some curious, some hostile. Messages arrived from distant systems warning of political consequences. The Council of Velarix debated quietly, the advisors arguing over what could be done to protect the Empire from this unexpected influence. And through it all, the princess remained calm, though he could sense her own concern growing. One morning, as they walked along the luminescent terraces, Salith stopped and faced him. "They are plotting," she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of worry. "The Council believes that you might corrupt the Empire. Some say you are a threat. Perhaps it is time they see the truth." Yet he also knew that fear had never stopped humans before. They had survived against impossible odds, not by hiding, but by standing firm and showing their worth. That evening, a secret meeting was called by one of the senior Velarix advisors. Salith insisted Elias attend, knowing the council would use every trick to intimidate him. The chamber was cold and echoing, filled with figures whose eyes held centuries of suspicion and authority. "You walk among us as if you belong," the lead advisor said, voice sharp. "Your presence is not merely unusual, it is dangerous. The princess is under your influence, and that is unacceptable. I have spoken truth, and I have shown respect. Humans are not here to dominate, only to survive, and to share what we know about courage, loyalty, and perseverance. They are fleeting, fragile, and insignificant. Do you understand the risk of overstepping?" Few had expected such boldness from a human, and none had heard words spoken with such quiet certainty. Salith's hand brushed his arm, a silent reminder of her support. The advisors shifted, their confidence shaken. "We will watch you," the lead advisor said finally. "But know this, the next misstep will not be forgiven. You walk a dangerous path, human. Remember that. Perhaps it is why humans survive when others would fail. We are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most powerful, but we endure, we adapt, we rise." Scholars debated whether humans could truly be trusted, while some younger Velarix expressed fascination, wondering if emotion and courage were qualities their empire had sacrificed too quickly. Then came the first act of overt challenge. A coalition of Velarix nobles, fearing change, moved to isolate Elias. They sent messages to his human superiors, warning that his presence near the princess was destabilizing the empire. Simultaneously, they spread rumors across Velarix planets, suggesting that the human had undue influence over the princess's decisions, a threat to tradition, law, and authority. Elias read the warnings, but instead of fear, he felt resolve. The galaxy expected humans to retreat. They expected hesitation, submission, and quiet obedience. They underestimated him. Again. He met Salith in the hidden gardens that night, the twin moons reflecting in the soft waters. "They are trying to force us apart," he said. "The council, the nobles, even some of my own people doubt me. They think I am too weak, too human to survive this. And yet here you are not weak. You are strong because you face danger, not because you have power. Humans survive because you feel, because you care, because you do not hide." The Velarix nobles pressed for Salith to distance herself, to reaffirm tradition, to remind everyone that humans were fleeting and weak. Messages from human diplomats urged Elias to protect himself, to retreat, to avoid confrontation. And the council watched every movement, every interaction, waiting for a misstep. But Elias did not retreat. He spoke honestly and calmly whenever he could, showing that humans could stand beside the strongest and not falter. He shared stories of human resilience, of survival against impossible odds, of loyalty and courage that had carried civilizations through darkness. And slowly, the whispering changed. Some Velarics began to see the truth that humans were not fragile. That humans endured, not because they were powerful, but because they were tenacious and brave. Then the true test arrived. One night, a rival coalition of Velarix nobles launched a formal challenge, claiming that the human aid must be removed to preserve imperial tradition. They threatened to cut ties with distant systems, to withdraw alliances, and even to declare minor skirmishes along border planets. The galaxy was on edge. Elias received the news in his quarters, but he did not panic. Humans had survived extinction events, betrayal, and countless wars. They had endured because they refused to give up. He met Salith that night, standing before the glowing pools of the palace gardens, and said, "They are trying to break us. And perhaps it is why the galaxy is finally noticing you." Instead, Elias stepped forward. He spoke calmly, clearly, and with honesty. He admitted humanity's flaws, wars fought, mistakes made, failures endured. But he also spoke of human courage, loyalty, and the capacity to care, even when the universe seemed indifferent. He spoke of survival against impossible odds, of hope, of the strength born from connection and perseverance. The chamber was silent. Few had heard a human speak with such clarity, and fewer still had felt the weight of truth in his words. Salith stood beside him, her presence a reminder that he was not alone. "Humans may be fleeting," Elias concluded, "but we endure, we rise, we survive. And when we are counted out, underestimated, and dismissed, we prove that the galaxy was wrong. That is who we are, that is our strength. And that is why we stand here today, not to dominate, but to remind the universe that courage, loyalty, and heart are forces no empire can ignore." For the first time, humans were no longer seen as fragile or insignificant. They were seen as survivors, as warriors of the heart, as beings capable of reshaping the galaxy, not with weapons, but with perseverance, honesty, and resilience. Elias turned to Salith, who smiled faintly, her hand brushing his arm. "You have changed them," she said. "Not through force, not through politics, but by being human. That is remarkable." They were meant to endure, to rise, to change the world simply by refusing to be dismissed. And for the first time, the impossible seemed possible. The galaxy was tense. Across the star systems, whispers had grown into debates, and debates into conflicts of ideas. The Council of Velarix, once rigid and unyielding, now found itself divided. Some saw Elias Ward, a human, as a threat, a fragile outsider with no right to influence the Empire. Others, however, had begun to see what the princess had always known. Humans were more than their size, their lifespan, their physical weaknesses. Humans had heart. Humans endured. Humans had courage. Salith stood on the high terrace of her palace, gazing at the twin moons reflecting off the alien gardens below. Elias joined her, his presence steady, calm, and unwavering. The wind carried the soft hum of the city, the distant calls of alien creatures, and the quiet energy of a galaxy on the brink of change. "They have not given up," Salith said, her voice calm but firm. "The rival coalition is preparing to act. They believe that removing you will preserve the Empire. That is their mistake. And if they attack..." The coalition had moved quickly, dispatching fleets to border systems and sending diplomats to declare that any human involvement in imperial decisions was illegal. They called Elias a danger, an interloper, a weak creature who had overstepped the bounds of his species. But the galaxy underestimated humanity once again. Humans across distant star systems rallied quietly. Scientists, explorers, diplomats, and soldiers sent messages of support. They shared evidence of humanity's history, moments when humans had survived extinction, conquered impossible odds, and stood firm when empires fell. They spoke not of conquest, but of endurance, loyalty, and courage. Across star systems, human voices rose in harmony, a quiet but undeniable statement: humanity mattered. Elias received the messages and read them aloud to Salith as they walked through the palace gardens. "They are with us," he said. "Not because we have power, not because we dominate, but because we endure, because we are human. And that is stronger than any weapon. They have taken your courage and made it their own. Humans have reminded the galaxy of something we had long forgotten, that heart is not weakness and truth cannot be silenced." Humans began sending envoys, sharing knowledge, offering assistance, and demonstrating courage in ways the galaxy had never anticipated. They did not threaten with weapons, nor did they seek control. They proved quietly but unmistakably that humans could endure, adapt, and influence even the most rigid systems. In the Velarix Council chamber, the debate reached its peak. Advisors argued passionately, some demanding that the human be removed, some acknowledging that their entire understanding of strength had been challenged. The rival coalition pressed their point, warning of rebellion, of unrest, of scandal. And then Salith spoke. "You speak of danger," she said, her voice steady, carrying through the chamber like a force of nature. "You speak of tradition, law, and stability. But what is stability if it denies courage? What is law if it ignores truth? The human you call fragile is stronger than many who sit here. He has reminded us of something we lost long ago. That is why I choose him, not as a pawn, not as a curiosity, but as someone worthy of trust, respect, and partnership. That is why I stand with him. And if the Empire wishes to endure, it will recognize strength in ways it has forgotten." Eyes flickered between Elias and Salith, and in that silence the power of humans was understood, not through dominance, not through violence, but through endurance, courage, and unyielding honesty. And then the first ripple of change spread. Young Velaric citizens, inspired by the example, began questioning old laws. Some nobles, previously strict in their adherence to tradition, began to recognize the courage they had suppressed in themselves. The Empire's rigid control began to shift, not because anyone demanded it, but because humans reminded them that courage and feeling were forces no one could contain. Meanwhile, Elias continued to speak with clarity, humility, and courage. He admitted humanity's flaws, acknowledging wars fought and mistakes made, yet he emphasized resilience, loyalty, and the ability to rise when all seemed lost. Humans were not perfect, he explained, but they endured, and in that endurance lay their true strength. The rival coalition's threats began to falter. They expected fear, capitulation, and weakness. Instead, they found determination, honesty, and the quiet power of unity. Across star systems, humanity's reputation shifted, from weak, fleeting species to a force defined by courage, perseverance, and heart. Finally, the moment came. A council vote was called to determine the legitimacy of Elias' presence and his connection to Salith. Velaric's nobles and advisors deliberated, weighing tradition against the undeniable truth of human influence. For hours, arguments were made, threats issued, and warnings delivered. When the vote was announced, it was clear. The majority acknowledged the value Elias brought, not as a human, but as a representative of courage, honesty, and resilience. The council accepted his presence, and by extension, his bond with Salith. The galaxy watched as the impossible became reality, a human recognized, respected, and validated by one of the most powerful empires in existence. Celebrations followed, but not as the galaxy had expected. There were no grand weapons parades, no displays of conquest. Instead, there were gatherings filled with music, storytelling, and shared joy. Humans and Velarics celebrated together, not as ruler and subject, but as beings capable of learning from one another. Elias stood beside Salith as the ceremony was held. The palace had been prepared not for a traditional Velaric's wedding, but for a union that symbolized something greater, the bridging of species, the power of courage, and the enduring value of heart. The twin moons reflected in the waters below as vows were exchanged. Elias felt the warmth of her hand in his, the quiet strength of a species that had long suppressed emotion standing beside him. He realized then that the galaxy's expectations had never mattered. Humanity had endured, and in doing so had reshaped the very course of history. Salith smiled at him, her eyes glowing softly. "You have changed the galaxy," she whispered. "No," Elias said, shaking his head. "Humans did. And perhaps we are only beginning." As the ceremony ended and the celebrations continued, Elias and Salith stood together, watching the moons reflected on the alien waters. The impossible had become possible. Humanity had risen not by overpowering, but by enduring, by inspiring, by proving that heart and courage could reshape even the most rigid empires. Elias squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said. Salith nodded. "Together," she replied. And for the first time, humans were no longer underestimated. They were recognized as a species that could endure, inspire, and change the galaxy, not with weapons, but with heart. The galaxy had been reminded of a truth it had long forgotten. Courage, honesty, and resilience were forces no empire could ignore. And as Elias and Salith looked to the future, they knew that the story of humans and Velarics had only just begun.